Hello, folks. Welcome to Inclusive Collective, where we share stories and learnings of inclusive people, organizations, and innovation. I am your co host, Nadia Butt. I'm an organizational development and belonging strategist, and I'm joined by the lovely Rob Hadley, a people and culture strategist specializing in DE&I and people analytics. Hey, Rob.
Hey, you ready for me?
I'm
You ready to rock?
ready. I feel like it's been a while. I'm so excited we're not officially back because we're technically still on our summer hiatus, but we are coming back strong in September.
Yeah. No, I had to find my microphone. It's been a few weeks since we did the regular recording schedule. I was like,
You
what
did,
what am I doing? Where's my microphone? Oh, it's right there. It's fine.
what's happening? I know I had to dust mine off.
How are you, Nadia?
I'm doing really well. I think I just shared with you I ran into my old high school volleyball coach at Dunkin' Donuts, and it was really nice to see him. And then I mentioned how
Yeah.
old I was, and he was like, "What?" He was like, "How?" It's just like yesterday. I felt like I was in high school, so it was really cool to see him.
I'm so intrigued by this. Are you playing any volleyball these days? No
No,
volleyball, right?
not at all. Not at all. Although I really should because I think it would help me like move my body more. But what was really fascinating, we actually got into it. So he was a principal he was my volleyball coach, but he was a principal at the high school. Not while I was there,
Uh-huh.
but he was a math teacher and then he transferred to the high school after I graduated, and he was a principal for 20 years at the high school that I went to. And when I told him about the work that I did, he literally clutched his chest and he was like, "I'm so proud of you." And then he started telling me about the leadership development and diversity, equity, inclusion work that like he had to do himself, and like how change is so hard even for educators. And it was a nice conversation to have with
Well,
him,
that's
and it
great.
was good to see
Yeah.
him. Yeah.
Yeah. So you'll be in a good mood for this
I
episode.
think so. I think so.
All right, so Nadia, tell us what we're gonna do today. We're switching things up. There's no guest today, so tell us what we're doing.
Yes. So there's no guest today, but on our show, folks, we're going to be responding to some listener questions that we received about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So these are things that Rob and I have kind of talked about in general, but never really maybe went into extensive detail on the podcast about. And then when we got some questions, and we were like, you know what, we should do an episode about some of these DE and I Q&A questions and answers. I think it's a great way for us to answer some questions, get our thoughts out there, and then also, get folks ready and excited for our new season coming up in September.
Awesome.
So shall we get started? Did you want to go ahead with the first question?
Yeah, let's go ahead and get started. There was a question just asking us to share our thoughts on the role of a DEI leader, and our listener had sent along an article from SHRM. And again, that's not our friend SHRM. That's the Society for Human Resource Management. I think I made that joke before. I can't
You
remember.
did. It's
I
so
think I do
great.
every single time.
Yeah.
All right. So according to the article, there was a LinkedIn study of C-suite hiring between 2019 and 2022. And while there were significant increases in DEI leader hirings in 2020 and 2021, no surprise there.
Yeah.
Number of roles declined in 2022, while other C-suite roles grew. The SHRM article also cited a Glassdoor survey, which cited access to DEI programs went from 27% in 2017 to 43% in 2021, and then has come down to 41% in 2022. Nadia,
Mm-hmm.
so look into your crystal ball.
Yeah.
And really tell us where this is going. What's the role? What's the future of the role for the DEI leader in
First
an
of all, I
organization?
really want to buy a crystal ball now because that would be great. But I think, yeah, I think that article was really interesting. And then I think when we talk to people, we are absolutely hearing a little bit of hesitation, fear, right? Like there were a bunch of layoffs across the board in many different sectors. In some of those included DE and I roles. But I think it's like roles and programming, I think are kind of these things that are at the intersection of not existing or being canceled. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing some organizations not prioritize it anymore, maybe not even know how they prioritize it. So, like, if we
Mm-hmm.
think about the past few years, ERGs were formed, DEI councils were formed, and then some companies formed DE&I teams and, hired DE&I program managers, DE&I consultants, whatever it might be. It was a thing. What I worry about is, one, tokenism. I worry about burnout. And frankly, I worry about there not being enough support for folks to keep the momentum going, because these folks that were hired have that expertise and they have that skill set and motivation to really change environments. And if you're getting rid of them, that
Hmm.
is something I fear. I also feel that what would be great is if we're seeing maybe these roles not existing or not needing these roles because it's been embedded into the culture. Like I always
Sure.
say as a consultant, my whole goal is that I'm no longer needed. I mean, as much as I want to be hired and be paid, the purpose of my role is like I no longer want to be someone who's of use to you because you've embedded into the culture. But we know
Hmm.
that's not happening because there's still higher amount levels of discrimination still happening. Practices and wages are still not equitable, and there's still a lack of representation at the leadership levels. What are your thoughts, Rob?
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Nadia. I love that. I touched on some of the same things, or I thought about some of the same things, right? So you're going to continue to see consolidation, right? So, first of all, I think that the studies, I'm not sure how valid the
Yeah,
things in the
sure.
SHRM are.
Yeah.
I don't think you can get your PhD based on that level of research, but
Yeah.
and I don't know why I have to be mean to the people at Glassdoor, but I just had to.
Yeah.
But I was in a conversation. So anecdotally, I think it's all
Anecdotally,
correct.
sure.
And I was in a conversation this week with a DEI recruiter, someone who recruits for these roles, and they were talking about seeing consolidation under emerging titles.
Mhm.
So how can you combine ESG and DEI together, or right? So something, and whatever else. And so
Yeah.
like a chief doing good officer or a chief purpose officer or whatever. And so we've seen organizations shrink. We've seen them trying to figure out how to put other functions in with DEI as well. And then just like you said, you'll see the consolidation, but I don't think it's wild, just like you pointed out, if it's done thoughtfully and for the right reasons, right? So DEI should be more than just internal facing, it should be more than just thinking about your workforce. It's, like there's not enough companies that look at DEI in the context of their customers, their communities, their partners. And so, you'll start to, if you think about the ideas that the target objectives have DEI integrated into everything, and hopefully you start to see some of that happening. So like the traditional model of having DEI leader reporting to the HR leader doesn't make much sense if that person's trying to influence on the commercial side of the business, or what's
Mhm.
happening in
Mhm.
terms of supply chain, things like that. So and
Sure.
like you said, you'll start to see leaders in other functions have DEI experience and skills. Hopefully, I don't think that that's happening at the rate that we're hoping for. So I'm 100% with you. I totally think that the idea is to be integrated. We're not yet there yet, so that's why it feels a little bit premature to start to combine these things together.
Yeah, sure. All right, let me move on to the next here. So, we got a great question here about the influence and impacts of AI in DE&I. That's a lot of acronyms. So, artificial intelligence and diversity, equity, inclusion. Right? There's been a lot of things that have been written on this topic, particularly recently, and the impacts that generated AI will have on DE&I in regards to practices, policies, and behavior. So, Rob, um, I'd love for you to offer kind of your thoughts on this.
Yeah, and the listener forwarded an article along from Fast Company. It was by Amira Barger. So I think we've love Amira Barger. She's we've talked
Mhm.
about a couple of things that she's written on this show. So she argues, and back to our point earlier, DEI is not just HR, and so it's not just internal facing, and therefore I 100% agree. I do think so. She points out all the things that she thinks that it's not going to be able to do enough because it should be focusing on more than just HR. But I do think that AI can and will continue to help some of the things that I want to do,
Oh,
right? In
like
terms of,
tell me
and
what? Yeah.
well, like so instantaneous pay equity, real time understanding differences in sentiment across demographics. So I think that there's a lot of room for the use of the tools in narrow use cases. So skillfully applied, I think it can be helpful. And I get excited about the use of AI
Yeah.
in helping solve some of the problems and answer some of the questions. So customer demographics, fairness in treating customers from employees, the way that your customers treat your employees, and being able to understand that relationship and make sure that your employees are getting treated well based on who they are, diversification in terms of suppliers in real time. Those are things that would not be possible without some of the technologies that we're seeing emerging. So that could be pretty cool. Now,
Mm,
just like the writer, I get skeptical if
yeah.
that will be skillfully, thoughtfully, and narrowly applied to real problems. So there will be cases of the enhancement of bias or lack of context. So put me down for, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Put me down for exciting in certain use cases, but I also
Mhm.
am a little bit. It's probably a disaster.
Yeah.
It'll probably be a disaster.
Well, right, if there's no kind of regulation around it, right? So, like, I think if someone has a superficial understanding of DE&I and incorrectly kind of regulates it into the functions that you're talking about, like recruitment or retention or whatever type of practice, um, those could really limit the impact of DE&I efforts.
Hmm.
And I there was a New York Times article recently of an 8-month pregnant woman who was arrested after false facial recognition match. So people are being wrongfully accused as a result of facial recognition technology. So
Hmm.
instead of holding people accountable, I think it's going to be really easier to hold technology accountable. And that's not okay. So for me, it's like there's so much bias that's built into this. I have a classmate whose research is focused on algorithmic bias in AI, and
Hmm.
it's kind of scary, to be honest with you. AI is not going to eliminate bias, right? If anything, I think it's going to metastasize it. So I'm excited that this could be something really cool, really fun, really helpful. But I think it has to be, I don't know if regulated is the right word. I think it has to be monitored in some manner. I'm not talking government super intervent. I'm just saying it has to be there. We have to be careful. That's all.
For sure, for sure. No, we're on the same page. And I think that this season we're going to have some AI ethics leaders on as well to talk about some of these issues as well. So I'm
Absolutely.
excited about that. Next up, Nadia, we heard
Yeah.
so Hollywood. Let's talk about Hollywood a little bit. Love talking about
I
Hollywood. I loved
know.
Hollywood.
I
All
love
right, so we had a
Hollywood.
question over the summer about our friends, DEI leaders in Hollywood leaving and our perspective. And so, to summarize, for those that haven't been following, several Black women executives from companies like Disney, Netflix, Warner Brothers, among others, either resigned or removed from their roles this summer. According to industry insiders via Variety, I have my subscription to Variety magazine.
Do
The
you?
exits were always. I get the one in the mail. I still get it in the mail.
Yeah.
The exits were driven by frustration, lack of resources, and exhaustion.
Mhm.
And I will turn it over to you as a person who was just featured in Forbes commenting on DEI leader exhaustion. Nadia, tell me
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on Hollywood DEI leaders?
Yeah, thanks for that, Rob. Definitely, I would encourage our listeners to go check out the article that Aparna Ray wrote in Forbes that me and some other colleagues were able to contribute into around DE&I fatigue. It is real. People don't leave companies, right? What's that saying? Like they leave managers and leaders. I think what we're seeing here is a lot of burnout, a lot of, like you said, frustration. It's the intersections of like the behaviors and decisions and people. And it's almost like a bad relationship. Like you get out while you can, like you got to get out. And if these folks that are hired to assess cultural change, to, assess current state, create strategy, and finally, implement that strategy, if they're not given the autonomy to do their job, they're not given the respect, they're not treated with dignity. Um, you know, I think that also includes them being able to display the ugly and messiness that is involved in what they kind of find at the organization. That's part of their job. And I think that includes them not being given resources like talent or budget to really succeed. Then why
Hmm.
would they stay? Right? Like we have to question, like, why would they stay? That's not a very, they're not valued, they're not respected for their expertise or their time. And at the end of the day, that it's all performative from the organization, and so from
Right.
these leaders. So I would absolutely, I mean, I have so much more to say about this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, but I definitely encourage people to go to check out that Forbes article.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not going to add too much more. I agree with everything that you said there, but I tell you, when I saw the articles and I kept seeing the articles, what I really thought was, what I really felt was, I was happy for the women
Hmm.
because I thought they're super talented leaders, and I think that they're gonna. have phenomenal opportunities. I felt happy for them and leaving a situation that they, where they felt frustration and exhaustion. And then I felt consequently bad for the employees of those organizations who were
Yeah.
losing these really excellent leaders and the signal that it sends to them about what's happening in terms of leadership. So,
Yeah.
um, unique industry, a lot going on in Hollywood right now, way more problematic. I think when I first started the show, I didn't think we would talk about Hollywood so much.
I didn't
And
think we talk
it's
about sports
kind of
either.
a it's kind of a mess,
It is. I mean, you have
there's
yeah,
the
go ahead.
strike, yeah.
The strike.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
just thinking about the strike and the fact that there's just so much going on a weekly basis there in terms of equity. So,
Yeah.
but
It
yeah, no, but really appreciate your perspective, and we'll come back to that Forbes article a little bit later. But for now, we're going to take a quick break. Nadia, stay with us, and we will be right back with more listener questions on Inclusive Collective.
Hey folks, welcome back. Our episode is featured around listener questions that we received. So Rob, the next question that we received from a listener was around what's the best place to start DE&I efforts? So if you were
Wow.
yeah, right? Little free coaching, if you will.
Yeah. And you have to try. Yeah.
Give a highlight of
It's
like where would you recommend to start?
okay. So this is incredibly contextual. So, okay. So obviously we go a lot of different directions. So let's assume that this question, it comes from the perspective of a business leader, CEO, wants to engage in DEI to create a better company in a very earnest fashion. So, I'll give you a very tactical and incredibly self-serving answer here. Okay.
Yeah.
So first, I would look for outside help.
Yeah.
That's what I would do.
Yep. Call Nadia and
If you
Rob.
can, there's a
Yeah.
lot of great folks and a lot of great
Of course.
thinkers and strategists out there. So if you can find the funds, and I think it really helps and save time and money in the long run. A lot of time and heartache in terms of trying to get this right. So all change efforts, as you know, Nadia, we talked about this, they're
Mhm.
difficult. This change effort has all these extraneous factors: racism, sexism, trauma, discrimination. So there's an added layer of complexity in taking on this type of organizational or cultural change, right? So I think it's really helpful to have someone who's seen it and done it and has some perspective. I would take a two-pronged attack for myself personally. I would have a coach focused on internal personal growth around DEI. And we've had folks on the show that focus on that. So Tara Robertson is one that comes to mind. And then I would also engage a strategic partner. So with the preference toward, again, self-serving, someone who could provide an assessment of the current state using data, evidence-driven approaches, and help develop a very thoughtful and targeted way forward to take real actions that can start to drive improvements. So that would be my two-pronged attack. And obviously I know that there's there are limitations sometimes in terms of funds and hiring people, but
Sure.
that to me would be the best approach. What are your thoughts, Nadia?
Rob, I love that. I appreciate the two-prong approach because this first aspect of the personal growth is so incredibly important. And so I really appreciate you mentioning that. Yeah, and absolutely the second approach of like kind of someone who can support you through the strategic efforts. If you don't know where you currently are and how you can set goals and figure out where you're going, I think if you don't know where in your practices, your policies, and your decision making, there's bias that shows
Mm-hmm.
up. If you can't figure that out, then how can you problem solve for it? And so, help having someone in that two prong approach, having someone think, help you think through what your pay practices look like, what your management practices look like, your recruiting practices, your retention practices. This is really important, and can help you create your strategy. And it's all about dialogue. And then I'm a big believer of go and see and really understanding
Mm-hmm.
where those biases show up. So, yeah, really great advice. Appreciate that, Rob. Should we go to the
Awesome.
final question?
Uh, yeah, the final DEI question. I'm reading from the question where it says, "I have been thinking a lot about the spectrum of race and how sometimes we see a person as either black or white and don't pay attention to the other intersectionality in their identities that could influence how they are being perceived or seen."
Mm.
Nadia, what are your thoughts on when we're talking about intersectionality? What just Go
Yeah.
for it. What do
So
you got?
yeah, so there, there's a spectrum of identities, right? So that includes things like race, gender, socioeconomic status, neurodivergence, religion, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We call that intersectionality, right? So like this interconnected nature of social categorization. Sorry, I'm going to use go technical. It's because I'm writing about this in my dissertation, so it's fresh. So these
Preach.
aspects, yeah. So these aspects of our identity, they overlap with each other, and so this can create systems of discrimination and disadvantages for folks that now are marginalized. Now,
Mhm,
the worst thing to do as humans is bucket people, but that is what we do. That is our nature as humans. So, based on our experiences, based on our worldviews, we make quick assumptions, quick assessments based on the data points that we have, and we start to categorize people, right? Without really asking the person who they are. And so we make grand assumptions because we are trying to analyze data really quickly in our brain.
mhm,
And that includes kind of fight or flight as well when we think
mhm,
about if we're in really stressful times.
mhm,
And so we make grand assumptions about people, about who they are, where they come from, what they believe in without getting to know them. And so this idea of like this spectrum, I feel for this person who asked this question. I want to dig deeper around like what are you experiencing or seeing? Because I recently have had a conversation with a friend who is identifies as Muslim, is white presenting,
mhm,
comes from the Middle East, and her colleagues want to bucket her as being a person of color. And she does not feel like she's a person of color. She does not identify as a person of color. And so I think having these conversations of saying, like, well, how do you identify? How do you see yourself in the world? Because what happens is our brains are just like really wanting to categorize people and bucket them into what we think we know, people that, based off of our experiences and interactions with people. And I think that can be really harmful for people. I think that can be
mhm.
really it can create a lot of harm. And so I, that those are my thoughts around it. I'd love to understand a little bit more deeply about what the kind of underlying question around it is. Um, but we also have a lot of people who've come on the podcast in prior episodes, and then also people who are coming on the podcast to talk about the intersectionality of identity. So definitely take a listen to some of those episodes. But Rob, what are your thoughts? I feel like I just did a
So
lecture. Did I
you
just did I
you
just
got so
lecture?
excited.
I
Yeah,
did.
please tune into the video. We'll have to pull some of that because Nadia got really excited talking about intersectionality. I completely agree. And, I just would add that that's why even small companies need to think about finding ways to what I was going to say was collect better demographic characteristic data on employees, obviously with their consent, obviously with careful considerations with regard to their privacy.
Yeah.
It's just very hard to develop a targeted strategy for improvement in DEI without being able to understand more than just race or uh, gender identity
Right.
in terms of who our employees are, so that we can really target things that we need to do to improve. As you were talking, and then you talked about going and seeing earlier, I was thinking, how do you do this in small companies, or how do you do this as a manager of the team? You take time to get to know them and really understand the identities, right? You treat your employees as more than just cogs in a machine. You treat them as people, right? And you
Right.
get to know them. You get to know all the different intricacies of their personality and their characteristics, and that's how you start to think about folks as more than just their race or their gender identity as well,
Right.
right? And that can be very useful in thinking about how to lead an organization.
Absolutely.
All right, Nadia, bonus pop culture question
Oh,
coming
I
in.
didn't.
I was
Yeah.
I had written off the pop culture question,
Yeah,
but
you
then
did. I don't even
I
have
I
I
was
didn't
like,
really read it.
no, I want to talk about a pop culture question.
Okay,
All
well,
right, so
let
the
me ask it then because
okay,
I didn't really think about it. So,
okay,
um so we had a listener write in that they're listening to a podcast about Michael Jackson and how to frame his legacy and music with his alleged crime. So they were wrestling with kind of separating the art from the artist.
hmm
And they also mentioned they referred to someone like David Chappelle, the comedian who they really find funny, but know can be problematic. So, Rob, what are your thoughts?
All right. So I only wanted to respond to this because I was thinking about this past weekend myself. I was mowing the lawn, I had the AirPods in,
Yeah.
and I
Wait, do
really
you have
wanted
one
to
of the
listen.
wait. Do you have a lawnmower that you push or a lawnmower that you sit in? Like
No,
the driving one?
no, I have to push it. So I get like the headset on,
Okay.
drinking the lemonade,
Oh,
and I
nice.
wanted to listen to this Kanye West song, right? Had it stuck in my head, and I want to listen to this Kanye West song, and I was like, nah, I don't want to give him the quarter of a cent or whatever, whatever he makes off me.
The royalty,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, whatever
Okay.
he makes off me listening to that one song.
Yeah.
And then I was in the car and I was like, Michael Jackson's like every third song
I
on
know.
some of this question, some of the stations I listen to. And so for some reason he gets a pass, like for based, and we know that there are certain things that he did that we can't possibly be
Yeah.
okay with, right? So if I said, Nadia, I'm going to go listen to a Bill Cosby 1984 HBO special, started
Yeah.
quoting jokes from Bill Cosby,
Yeah.
I don't think you'd want to hang around with me. I don't think you'd. I don't think you'd be.
I know. I
You'd
mean,
kind of roll your eyes at me, right? You'd be like, "This, what's
probably.
this
I
guy
might
loser
laugh a
doing?"
little because I laugh at everything, but yeah, I'd
Like,
probably be
or I
like,
was
"What
like,
is it?" Yeah.
"Yeah, Bill Cosby." Like, so for some reason, Michael Jackson gets passed. I don't think he. I really don't think he should. To be honest with you. And then with the Dave Chappelle stuff, I thought that he's a comedian,
Yeah.
and he says sometimes things that we find incendiary. That's different from a criminal act, right? Like
Yeah.
that's
Yep.
like we don't agree with him, and we can choose to tune things out. So I don't know. He shouldn't necessarily be filtered, but you know, collectively through an organization
Yeah, I think that's a
or
great.
canceled.
Mhm.
But someone with a criminal act, I'm okay with canceling. I don't know. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I think that's a good distinction. I do. I think that's a great distinction. I also struggle though then if that's the case. There's a lot of sports players, particularly football players, and I don't know names, so maybe this is a grand assumption, but there's a lot of domestic abuse charges or sexual harassment charges with some of these players and we
Hmm.
still watch football. And so,
Yeah.
it's like it's such a sensitive and touchy subject. I mean, then and if you wanna take it to another level, like, I there's people that I know that still go to Chick-fil-A, for example, and call it hateful chicken, but it's really great hateful chicken because of their stance around LGBTQIA rights. So it's hard when you're, wanting to take a stance against what you believe in and what your kind of values are, but the entertainment or the food or whatever is good and you wanna subscribe to it. So, I think
Yeah.
that distinction though of like crime versus art or creativeness, and then the option to like not listen in, I think that's something that I wanna reflect on a little bit more. I'd be curious like what our listeners, what they're kind
Yeah.
of what they do. Maybe that's a question we can pose on our LinkedIn.
Yeah, yeah. No, I like it. Let's hear from our listeners on that. So, um, Nadia, thanks. Brilliant stuff. If I don't say so myself, appreciate
I
all your
know.
thoughts on some of these DEI listener questions. Let's take another quick break, and we'll be right back with raves and raves. Welcome back to Inclusive Collective. Let's wrap up today with I thought we were doing two raves, but actually, Nadia, you have a rant for us. So
I have a
we're gonna do
rant.
rant and rave. Okay.
Yeah.
All
So
right.
I woke up this morning to an article. The University of Houston announced that they are closing their LGBTQ resource center in response to the Texas
Why?
DEI ban.
Mm,
Yeah, right. Why? Governor Abbott signed the bill into law late June. I just feel really sad for those students going on campus this fall with like a lack of support and resources from their university. That's all.
yeah. No, that's bad. That's bad news. No,
Yeah.
that's one thing. That's one thing with not doing the rants for the last few weeks. I haven't kept up on all the things to
All
get
the
really upset about.
sad news.
So,
I know.
so no, it definitely, yeah, heart goes out to those students, and they definitely, hopefully, they find some support. And there's right, like we're all trying to figure ways around terrible regulations that have been passed in some of these states, right? So,
Totally.
um, definitely. And so then my rave is for my friend Nadia Butt, who
Aw.
again we was featured in a Forbes article this week titled "DEI Fatigue: Resistance to Opportunity, Unpacking the Moment and Navigating the Path Forward." Please go check it out in Forbes from our friend partner Ray. So great job. Nadia, you're all over the place. You're featured in so many things these days. I have a hard time picking it out. So
So fun. I know. I appreciate kind of the opportunity to use my, allow me to use my voice. So thank you to like a partner for the Forbes and to Consulta for the opportunity on the podcast that I was on. It's all good
awesome.
stuff, right? Yeah, let's make some change, Rob. That's what we're here for.
Love it.
So, folks, thank you so much for joining us this week. We are really excited about September and season 4, so definitely stay tuned for that. Inclusive Collective is a production of Rifelion Media. We'd love to hear from you, so please send us your feedback at inclusivecollective@rifelion.com. You can find us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. If you like what you heard, please be sure to subscribe and rate us wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to get in touch with us for consulting, please check me out at nasconsultants.com and Rob at takanoconsulting.com. Thanks again. We will see you next week. Be well.